Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, again, depending on where you're joining in from. A very warm welcome to our new webinar, Aligning OKRs to PPM and Execution, the why and how. OKRs have certainly been in the news for quite some time now. And the other big topic that seems to occupy everybody's mind is about how do you align execution to overall business strategy, and how do you make sure that um, everyone who is participating at different levels of the organization are able to to connect the strategy to execution and are able to provide the right level of visibility to the entire organization. So it should be a very interesting session today. Let's get started while we are waiting for a few other people to join in. Um, so the agenda is straightforward. We'll start with some introductions. I'll give you an overview of Swift Kanban Digite in case some of you are not familiar with us. And then we'll get on to the main topic for today. Before that, I will ask you a couple of questions so we get an idea of who you are and what are some of the challenges that you are looking at. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session. Um, the session is being recorded, so you will get to see the recordings afterwards if you would like to do that. And also, we will take questions using the Q&A panel or questions box that is there on the right side of your screens on the GoToWebinar panel. And feel free to ask a question anytime, and we will take them up at the end of the webinar, at the end of the main talk. So with that, let me introduce our main speaker today, Avinash Rao. Avinash is Vice President of Product Management at Digite. And my name is Mahesh Singh. I'm co-founder and I handle marketing and consulting at Digite. A little bit more about Avinash. He has been, long-term in the IT industry in a variety of different functions, IT as well as software. A lot of experience in product development, product management, DevOps, and lean agile transformation. He's a master product management professional. He's also a Kanban University KMP2 certified Kanban professional. He's a DevOps coach and the DOI SRE Foundation certified coach as well. I've known Avinash for a number of years, and he has spoken in a variety of different industry conferences and forums, and it's always great to hear what he has to say. And I'm looking forward to this session today as well. Before I hand over to him, I just want to give you a quick overview of Digite. So we've been a pioneer in web-based collaborative product and solutions for distributed teams, primarily in the area of lean agile project management, portfolio management, and application lifecycle management. Our use cases span a variety of different both IT software as well as business use cases, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Like I said, we provide some powerful visual work management capabilities, and our systems are used by both, probably about 70% of our customers tend to be IT and software folks, but we have at least about 30% of business functions such as marketing or HR or legal, procurement, product design, etc., using our systems for managing their overall workflow and value streams. And we have a fairly large number of people using it for personal work management, personal Kanban type of applications as well, whether it is to manage the family finances or whether it is to manage your own personal work. So very interesting use cases that we have with our customers. Something that we are very well known for is our ability to help you manage strategy to execution alignment. Not surprising given the topic of the conference today, the webinar today. So we provide a number of capabilities around, visually defining your portfolios and then drilling them down into program and execution level workflows within the same Kanban board or across multiple Kanban boards. And you can build out this kind of a hierarchy that you see irrespective of the kind of terminology that you use, whether it is portfolio, program, projects, or epics, features, user stories, and tasks, whatever be the hierarchy with which you sort of model your strategy all the way down to actual work that teams do, you can define that. We provide some very interesting capability in terms of risk management or opportunity evaluation to see what are the right set of next things to take up. and those are then available to you for execution, for taking up onto your Kanban boards, onto your projects for actual work. And finally, we have a lot of capability around uh, the the ability to forecast your performance, whether at a individual team level or at an overall service level, to understand what is your capability, what is the demand on the system, and therefore what is the kind of expectations that you can set with your customers and your stakeholders, and have a very data-driven discussion around what this is, what the overall organization can deliver. So a number of things that are available that will help you maybe improve your overall strategy to execution processes. Um, we have some powerful flow analytics, which are again sort of expected in these types of tooling, and we really are well known for some of the capabilities that we provide there. Just the last couple of slides here. One thing is we understand our customers are already using a variety of tools, and we have some pretty strong integration capabilities. So we can easily sit amongst your ecosystem and then give you the kind of visibility, the kind of modeling requirements that you might have in terms of modeling your work and your strategy to execution alignment. And finally, just a quick look at some of our key customers, and you may see some very well-known names. We also have some very small customers, and our teams and our customers can range from a few hundreds to tens of thousands of users using our systems. So we have a really good range and a good ability to scale. So with that, let me first pause here for a few quick questions so we know who the audience today is. So if we can bring up the poll questions. What we wanted to do was to understand what is your own role in the organization. So if you could just take a quick second to respond to the this poll question. We also wanted to understand what are your current challenges around the aspect of modeling a strategy and aligning it to the work that gets done to meet those strategy requirements. So let's take a look at the responses to this one. And then the third one is we want to just get an idea of your involvement in this system. So looks like we have, okay, let's take a look at the response to this one and see who are the people in the audience today. Cool, Avinash, you can see that as I would expect, I guess, we have about 60% of the folks who are in the project portfolio management function, 12% from IT, 30% from others. I was hoping to see some finance or operations people and somebody from the leadership, but nevertheless. Okay, let's take the next question. All right, we just wanted to get an idea of what are the current methods that you use for portfolio management and OKRs, if you do use them, or if you're using some other scaled method for managing enterprise level portfolios and work. So let's take a quick look again at this. I'll just give a few more seconds. All right, maybe we can look at the results now. And hopefully this is of interest to all of you as well, to see what are your peers doing. So there you go. That's great. Actually, 35% of people already use OKRs, and as you probably see the distribution, formal portfolio management, fairly standard and well known. Scale Kanban and other scale methods about 50%, 55%. So that's great. So let's take, so there are others, 41%. I'd be very curious to know what these are. So if you don't mind, if you could perhaps use, I know that we don't have a comment section in this. So if you could use the questions box itself and let us know what else are you doing, that would be really interesting to us. So please go ahead and do that whenever you get a chance. In the meantime, let's take up the last poll question. And that is about what are the challenges that you currently face in your current process, if any. So if you don't have any challenges, none of the above, obviously. But if you have, if you see challenges in your organization about this, we'd like to know about that. Right, give another 10 seconds here for people to vote. I know it's either late in the evening for some of you joining from places like India. Pacific time, it's a little early, but anyway, great. Let's take a look at the responses. Okay, so about 50% no formal process, 25% no formal tooling. So I guess Excel is the sort of common denominator of how a lot of businesses run. And if you're there, don't feel bad, because I know an amazing amount of companies and people who use that. Some tooling but no integration. So yes, the ability to connect strategy to execution might be a challenge, and a lot of companies still face that. And of course, others, there are some of you who don't have these challenges. Perhaps you have others, and again, we'd like to see if we can perhaps give us some feedback on that. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your responses. And again, welcome to this webinar. Hopefully, you will find this useful. So, Avinar, with that, over to you. Let's get started with the main session.
Okay, thanks, Mahesh. Let me put my slide up. Mahesh, just to check, do you see and hear me all right?
Yep, you're good. You can see your
Okay,
titles.
all right. Thanks everyone for joining this session. Today we're going to talk about aligning OKRs to PPM and execution. I'm Avinash Rao, VP of Products at Digite. What's on this screen, I think Mahesh has covered already, so I won't spend any time on it. What I want to do today in this session is spend about the next 30 minutes talking through the content of how we align our OKRs, which is the strategic planning process, with PPM, which covers the portfolio management process along or to our execution systems. And obviously, it's a bi-directional sync. So you have data going down the line and coming back upstream to inform what is really happening in the business. One thing I did want to mention about me personally is that that's the view that I hope to see next month from Kanchenjunga Base Camp. So I'll be trekking there in April, so looking forward to that. In this session, what I want to do is assume a little bit of basic familiarity with OKRs and with PPM. So I'm not going to cover any of the basic definitions. Obviously, that seems like a good assumption to make, given what we saw in the poll just a few minutes ago. So I just wanted to set that expectation that we are not going to the very basics of what OKRs is, how we're going to write it, or a PPM is, but we are really going to talk about the alignment of the strategic planning process, of the portfolio management process, and of the execution process. I'd like to start off with a small anecdote. I'm very passionate about this area, so I tend to get fairly animated and excited when I'm talking about this. So I was doing this with a good friend of mine. Now, this gentleman is someone who's a fair bit more experienced than me, and he wasn't familiar with OKRs and PPM. And by the time I spent about 10-15 minutes explaining the whole thing, he said, "You know what? We've been doing OKRs and PPMs years ago. We just called it MBO, management by objectives, and we called it portfolio planning." Right? So it's just another example of how the industry is putting old wine in new bottle. It's something that's been around for a long time, and it's not something that's really new or very different. So are OKRs and PPM really new, or what's really happening? Because if you think about it, the original MBO definition is that you compare the actual performance and achievements to the defined objectives, which was the whole thing that Peter Drucker started in 1954 with MBOs. And GE very famously, of course, had hired McKinsey in the 70s to manage its portfolio. So the basic ideas underlying portfolio management have been around since then. And from the 60s, we've had this approach that we should really measure outcomes rather than measure activities. But why PPM and OKR right now? Why are they having a moment? Why are so many of us really adopting these methods? And I think to understand why OKRs and PPM and why now, we have to understand the forces that are driving their adoption, really. And in order to do that, let's step back a little bit and consider what Agile did for the entire execution portion of the life cycle, right? So if we had perfect requirements, waterfall is actually an efficient way to get projects done. So I was in the UK a few years ago, and we were working with the aerospace industry. And there, for example, they don't care as much about speed, but they're more very focused on accuracy, right? A small change really is extraordinarily expensive in that particular industry. So there are methods such as language, which is something that one of the key leaders who started the whole software metrics movement, Tom Gill, really talks about that. We spend a lot of time and energy focused on getting requirements right. I remember one memorable long afternoon with Tom's help. We made 82 changes in reviewing one A4 sheet of requirements in our product, because we went through each word and said, how can this be interpreted? How can this be tested? How do we make sure that this is exactly right? Obviously, if you spend that kind of time and energy in creating those requirements, and then we deliver perfect conformance to specifications, right? Um, this assumes, though, that throughout the entire journey that you're going to undertake in defining and then developing those requirements, the requirements and the market doesn't change. But you know that the world's changed a great deal, right? So the image on the left is from Russia, where obviously lives turned upside down in the last 2 weeks. So in many industries, we do not have the luxury of waiting to create perfect requirements and then spend time in developing conformance to specifications. What there is instead is a strong element of sense and respond. That market changes are rapid and must be responded to quickly. And then the complexity in the context and the competition makes the rapid response even more critical. So what to summarize what we really need in execution, and Agile, the whole movement really taught us how to do many of these things, is to be able to get fast feedback, is to be able to prioritize items of value, to break down silos and barriers, and to use inspection and adaptation as a way to continuously improve our process and to deliver value on an ongoing basis. But if you think about it, Agile primarily focused itself on the execution part of the overall life cycle. There's strategic planning, and then there's portfolio management, and then there is execution. And that's where Agile has made a huge difference in how we work in the last 15 to 20 years. I've also put DevOps there in brackets. I'm going to spend 2 minutes on it, but I'm not going to touch upon that particular area in the rest of this session. Uh, I think a lot of the elements that we saw here in terms of achieving fast feedback, in terms of breaking down silos and to be able to inspect and adapt, engineering is today applying those concepts using the DevOps methods. So that what used to take days, if not weeks, for a developer to get feedback on his or her code is something that you get all near instantly as soon as you check in your code. But the focus for today, we're going to talk about the strategic planning process and then the portfolio management process, which are upstream to execution. And many changes that actually drive changes in our execution, that drive the response in the execution, actually happen upstream. Right? So there are industry factors, there are market changes, there is changes in the context, the competition, the complexity, which are in fact driving the need for a rapid response at the time of execution. So we need to start with the strategic planning process and then work our way down and see how we can achieve an alignment across all three blocks really. So if I had put a few ₹100 every time this happened to me in a business review, I think that would have been a large amount of money that I would have had in the bank by now. Because we used to go in and go into a business review, and the business leader would be sitting at one end of the table and would be fairly worried because the growth and profitability were off target. But all the stakeholders sitting around the table would say, hey, you know what? I met my target. I hired 40 people this year. I was supposed to hire 38, but I've done 40. And then other people say I made 12 prospects and made 9 second level pitches, which is more than what I expected to do in the last time period. And the delivery person says all deliveries were on time. If everyone around the table met what they were supposed to do in terms of activities, but the business as a whole did not meet what it was supposed to in terms of growth and profitability, then clearly there's something missing, isn't it? And that is the area that OKRs are really focused on. They're focused on, or they grew out of that disconnect that we have between the activities and the outcomes. The OKR method focuses on objectives and how these objectives will be measured via key results. And hopefully these are very, very clear, very, very visible, and they pull all streams towards one set of outcomes. OKRs are a great way to expose the discontinuities that happen in such cases, and give us a vocabulary to really say that, you know what, we decided to do all these activities, but here's the measurement, the key results that we are all really focused on, and hence what adjustments we need to make over a period of time. Now, the same imperatives that we looked at when we looked at the agile process also apply to the strategic planning process. If the strategic planning process decides to set things in advance, MBO style, then it won't survive reality, contact with reality, right? A lot of things now happen in a 12-month period. So achieving these objectives in a volatile market, a volatile context, a volatile world demands that we create optionality. And it also demands that different areas in an organization, as represented by all these folks sitting across the table, virtual tables now, but it demands that these different functions and people come together on different tasks or projects, which may or may not be the same ones that were initially planned. The ability for an organization to get fast feedback on its strategic plans, to be able to prioritize which of those items are really giving them value, and to be able to inspect and adapt. And to do all this, obviously, you need to break down the silos. So everything that we said is true about execution. The same imperatives also apply to the strategic planning process. And if we are reviewing and adjusting plans on an ongoing monthly or quarterly basis, I know several organizations that look at their entire OKRs on a monthly basis. Some organizations look at it on a quarterly basis, depending on the pace of change in their business. But it becomes really key that you then propagate the changes in those plans across the entire organization, that you have to take it not just from the OKR system, but those decisions must be reflected in execution. And the transmission, the image on the right is supposed to be a transmission. So the transmission that really takes this information and translates it into execution is the whole PPM process. Because what a traditional portfolio allocation system used to do is that it used to take a set of budgets split that into multiple projects. There used to be a fairly long evaluation process where they would say that, what are the right projects that we're going to fund for this year, and then they would allocate funds typically for a period of the entire year. But if it's true that we must create optionality in order for us to respond to a changing market, then it also means that that optionality must be reflected in the PPM process. And what does that really mean? It means that we must have multiple projects and tasks in play and continuously use the results that we are seeing in order to adjust which projects are delivering results and therefore must be continue to be funded, and which are the projects that very quickly must be killed or deprioritized until they are able to showcase the value that they are delivering. And that becomes a key function of the PPM process. I'm going to explain this a little bit more with an illustration. That a traditional PPM system would take the budget of the organization, split it among multiple lines of business, and then among the various demands or the potential projects that could possibly be executed by the LOB, it would then pick a winner and then fund that winner through the period of a year. I've gone through several cycles where we would get funded in about April or May, and then from December to March onwards, essentially it would be one big exercise to justify everything that had been done in Q1, Q2, and Q3, and a lot of time and energy would essentially be spent in justifying and preparing material as to why this project or program must continue to be funded through the next year. Now, in the new world, especially in industries that are being impacted, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, are being impacted by digital transformation. What is essentially happening in PPM systems is that these PPM systems take your budget and distribute it in Q1 across a larger set of projects than you would traditionally have funded. However, the funding is for a much shorter time period. And it is also true that looking at the progress, looking at the value delivered at the end of each time period, in this case, illustration a quarter, a decision would be made whether we are going to continue to fund this project. All the reds indicate that these particular projects were dropped or stopped after, let's say, 1 quarter, 2 quarters, or 3 quarters. Hopefully in our organizations, the number of successful projects are much larger, so you don't see as many reds. However, we shouldn't think of these reds as being a bad thing at all, right? Because what we are really seeing here is that we did choose to fund certain projects, but in continuously inspecting, we are seeing that they are not delivering, for whatever reason, the value that was forecasted to be delivered by those projects. So what also happens is that this lighter colored bar here is that when other projects are stopped, we actually have the ability and the budget to start off projects that were not initially funded because there was a change in the feasibility, there was a change in the market requirements, etc. So you will see that PPM systems now support churn. They don't see it as a bad thing at all, and it isn't. And that there is an outcome-based reallocation. And what is this outcome? The outcomes really are the key results which we are measuring on an ongoing basis. And we are saying, are we moving the needle on the key results on the basis of all these project work that we are delivering on an ongoing basis? Also, the other positive in my mind is that more funding is now available to winning initiatives that are indeed achieving outcomes. So what we will be able to do is identify certain projects which are giving value. They are right for that particular market climate. They are right in terms of timing. So we actually allocate more resources to those so that we are able to get the benefit of those projects. So there is an impact though of taking this approach on execution teams, because you could ask the question that you have several execution teams, won't there be too much chopping and changing because you have a project team and then you dissolve those and then you ask people to move to a different project team? What is really happening is that the dynamic is accelerating the shift from project teams to longer running product teams, right? So it is still uncommon that we take multiple different projects, break them up, and then put them together again. That is an expensive thing to do. So what we do instead is that we fund product teams for a longer period of time, but what they work on keeps on continuously changing. So we change the focus of the execution team to a prioritized backlog, and that backlog is full of items that are funded by the PPM system in alignment with what is being seen in the KRs. One of the fundamental thing that this does is that it takes the stress away from the execution side, because we're no longer spending a lot of our time and energy about configuring project teams, right? That you have one product team that is relatively long running. Our focus then is to make sure that they have the right prioritized backlog. And the right prioritized backlog is funded by the PPM system in alignment with the OKRs. Right. So there are a couple of other critical capabilities as well that come into the picture. The first one is that the amount of alignment needed end to end is now much higher than before. If you think about it, in the process before, you had one group of people who were primarily concerned with the strategic planning process. You had a second group of people, perhaps from finance and operations, who were primarily worried about portfolio management, portfolio allocation, etc. And the third set of folks, obviously very focused on delivering project managers who are very looking very closely at their particular deliverables and making sure that the project met its charter. With given the ability, increasing ability to be able to influence execution and chop and change funding depending on what we see as outcomes, each of these blocks now need to start speaking to each other. That the budget that is available against an objective or against certain key results in the OKR system now translates on a regular basis into what is funded and what is approved or not in the PPM system, and that of course directly drives what is being picked up in the execution system. The amount of alignment needed end to end, as well as the amount of insight and information that flows back from execution back into PPM and into OKRs, is now much more. It also needs to be more accurate because now decisions are being made on it and very quickly, and it also needs to flow through on a reasonably painless basis. And that becomes something that is a big ask. If companies are using different systems for each of these three, it becomes very, very important to use integrations so that some of the data is really flowing through. And what we're going to show in a few minutes is the minimum set of data that's really needed to be transferred across these various systems on a bi-directional basis for us to have a sense of what is really needed, and to signal how each of these stages are doing. So integrations help provide that immediate end-to-end visibility, and integrations are now becoming a very critical part of the requirement. A second consequence of operating in this manner is that the amount of collaboration that is needed in the system now becomes extremely high, because you're now speaking not just within your own teams, but you're also speaking and trying to understand what is happening across the entire life cycle. Obviously, this means that systems which have access to a particular end-to-end underlying platform will find it, collaboration platform will find it more easier than if you had three disparate systems and one, let's say, communication channel for collaboration across, and none of these systems speak to each other. Okay, so now let us take a look at how this is actually mapped in practice. That you have OKRs, you have a PPM system, and then you have execution systems. As Mahesh mentioned in the right in the beginning, that we do have boards. We have multiple levels of boards that will enable you to execute this system. But what I'm going to focus on here is to say, what is the minimum set of data that must flow in each direction for us to have a view of how much progress we are making on an ongoing basis. I do want to say that given the amount of importance that's now given to integration and to collaboration, there are a couple of other, we think, cool things that we are doing. And I'll talk about that towards the end of this session. Okay, so the objectives, let's say that they have been set for the period 2022. I've just taken a fairly standard example for OKRs, that the objective we have is to grow our business faster than the 3-year average. That in the last 3 years, we've grown at a certain rate. We now want to grow at a rate that is faster than that. The way we are going to measure our key results to know that we have achieved this particular objective is that we are going to increase revenue by $2 million. We want to reduce customer churn by 10%, and we want 25% of this growth to come from new products. Those are the very clear key results, which, if met, tell us that we are achieving this objective. Now, there is a budget that is associated with this set of objectives and with this objective and key results in the OKR system. Often what happens is that people tend to model OKRs as though it is an unconstrained system, meaning that if we have, let's say, 3 different objectives, there will be several key results under it, which will require an investment which might be higher than the amount that the company actually has in order to invest in its various initiatives. So a key constraint that comes out from the OKR systems into the PPM system is the budget along with the outcomes associated with achieving that particular outcome. Now, I'm going to pick one outcome, that reduce customer churn by 10%. And if we are to achieve this particular outcome in PPM, there are a set of demands that get put in the PPM system. Remember that one key thing, if you take away nothing else at all, I would suggest that you take away this particular point, is that our ability to respond to a rapidly changing market is contingent on our ability to create optionality. it is nearly impossible to decide a priori over the period of, let's say, 1 year, which which initiatives are going to succeed, which initiatives are going to fail, etc. While we have a certain viewpoint, um, our ability to predict is actually pretty low. And that's not because we are incompetent, it's just that it is a function of what is happening in the market. It's also a function of what is happening, what competitors are doing, right? And all those influence our ability to succeed with this particular initiative or not. So what happens in the PPM system is that you set up an outcome, which is reduce customer churn by 10%. Multiple different stakeholders put demands, and these demands can be potential projects. These demands can also be potential tasks. What I mean by a task is that it can be a marketing message, it can be commissioning an ad campaign, right? So those are not necessarily projects, but they can be thought of as tasks. And each of those would then be listed against this particular outcome in the PPM system. Not everything, not all demands against this outcome are approved. The approved demands for a certain time period, which could be as short as a month or half a year, but most typically a quarter, goes into the execution systems. And if you're using a Kanban board, a to-do doing done, then you can track the progress of the execution of both your IT projects as well as your IT, non-IT projects or tasks. The execution information has essentially two signals. One signal is how are we doing on schedule and how we are doing on cost. And both these signals go into the PPM system, because the PPM system then looks at the completion information to feed back into the OKRs and to refresh the results. We will, at every let's say a quarterly period, we take a look at how much we have executed, what we have completed, bring that into PPM, and then look at the key results to say that, hey, you know what, we wanted to increase our revenue by 2 million in 2022. We are 1 quarter in and we have gone up only by 100K as a result of these particular items which have been executed. We will also look at the PPM system to say, do we need to make any changes in order to make sure that we achieve these key results. So what I'm going to do is, now that you have this entire set of data that flows across, is that I'm going to go back to this particular slide here and say that if you have one system where you've got your OKRs, you've got a second system for PPM and a third for project execution, you need to look at these particular minimum set of data that you're flowing your budgets and your outcomes from your OKRs to the PPM system. From your PPM system, you're flowing your approved demands into execution. From your execution system, you feed back the schedule and spend from your execution into PPM, and on completion, it feeds back into recomputation of the key results. One of the ways that we think, and this is something that I think is really important for the future, is that given the importance of integration and collaboration, we are actually close to launching a Slack-based OKR and PPM offering. That the entire system is built out using Slack as a backbone. There's no web app at all. And if you're interested in using and providing this feedback, these systems, and giving us feedback pre-launch, please do leave your email ID. You can put it in the questions box, or we are going to have a session feedback right after this in a few minutes, and we will get in touch with you. In return for getting your feedback on these products, obviously we will be happy to give you licenses to our products, the Slack-based OKR and PPM, as a thank you for your feedback. So with that, let me take a look at how much time I spent. Okay, decent. We've got 15 minutes then for questions and answers. I'm going to take a look at the questions tab here, and please do start putting in your questions so that we can respond to those.
Excellent. Thanks, Avinash, for a great session. A very sort of practical and very, I would say almost like a working session to how to design and build a complete session, which would help our audience to set up their own systems. All right. So there is a question from Anand. It says, how will effective this framework from regular OKR? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I guess, Anand, would you mind? Let me actually do this. Let me bring you on the mic, and maybe you can ask your question live. And you may need to unmute yourself to ask the question. So Anand, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah, thanks, Makesh, for unmuting. My question, let me put it in the way. We were running our regular OKR. So as we are not running with any PPM or execution model, like how this will be effectively going to be engaged with this particular model? That is my question.
Yes. So if you think about it, OKRs are not a means to themselves. At the end of the day, what you want to do is to take what you have in your OKRs and use it to influence your execution system. Having a PPM system is actually not mandatory at all, right? Because there are multiple ways in which different organizations take the information from OKRs and couple it to the execution system. However, the integration of the OKR system with the execution system is absolutely fundamental and key, because you want to be able to respond to changes that you are seeing in the market, etc., and have those influence what you are doing in terms of both your projects as well as your tasks. So it is, I've seen some organizations that actually do this using Excel, using manual communication, etc., to get the message across. But in terms of visibility and in terms of creating one unified view for the entire enterprise, I think it is really useful. I would say I would strongly recommend it, that you link at least the OKRs and the execution systems, if not a PPM.
Okay, got it.
Thanks, Anand. There's a question, Avinash, from Robert, and he says, if you can go into more detail about how you expect costs to be collected at the levels of the team Kanban boards. It's a good question. I think at the typical Kanban system, we are not collecting cost information there, but I guess we are collecting effort information.
So there's really only two ways to look at how to collect cost information, especially if you are running product teams. If you're running project teams, obviously there is more variability, but if you are running product teams, you have teams that put in timesheets. So we often use that timesheet data in order to collate the information on the actual effort that is being incurred. We translate that into a particular cost. We actually do not need to go to that level of detail, because the big change between the old project way of looking at the world was to control costs to the nth degree, to a very fine granularity. But here all you're looking at is, I have a certain amount of sunk cost which I'm putting into my standing product team. The focus is to make sure that they are working on the right backlog items that are giving us the most value in terms of moving the needle on our objectives. So often what companies do is that they use allocated costs, that they know that there is a certain cost associated with the role, and they simply multiply the number of people by the average for that role and get a sense of how much cost is being incurred there. So the fine grainness of the measurement differs, but I think timesheets and allocated costs are two reasonably easy ways to collect that information. My submission also is that it is not critical to be super granular about that cost. You need to know how much is being spent, but I think either timesheet or allocated costs will do the job for you. I hope that makes sense.
All right, I think Robert has another follow-up question. Let's go ahead and take that. So to follow up, you assume that the actual costs correspond to the allocated budgets, assuming people are working on the right things. Is that right? And maybe, Robert, I can, I'm sorry, I should have offered this already. I can unmute you so you can go
Yes,
ahead
please.
and talk as well. There you go. I think you may need to unmute yourself and then you can come live on the session. Okay. Or maybe possible that our Robert is not able to speak on the session. Oh, there you
Here
are.
we go.
Oh, there you go.
Right.
Here we go. Is my question clear? I'm just trying to make sure I understand where you're gathering that cost information from.
So
So is my
most execution systems do have a link into into a list of team members, that you would have a
yes,
set of team members that are assigned to a particular product team or a project team.
right.
And if they're filing timesheets, that's where you pick the cost from. And then if they're not, then you just look at the average cost for the roles that you have on the team and pick the allocated cost.
Yeah, I guess so. The question, Robert, is so for example, in our systems, our products that we have, you can have the rate of per hour cost of a person available at the individual level. That is for all the resources or all the people that are set up in your PPM system. There will typically be and we have that facility where you can capture the cost of the person at a per hour level for each individual, or you can do so at the role levels, like Vinash is saying. So given the timesheet data, the effort data, as well as the rate information, you can get the overall cost.
Okay.
Does that?
I mean, that's clear to me. But what I hear you saying is that either you're collecting the data based on that type of rule-based calculation within the Kanban board itself, or you have some type of timesheet collection information, or you completely short circuit the Kanban board and you just make the assumption that what you allocated at the PPM level is what the actual cost was, which is
I
not what you
agree
want to
with
do.
you. Yeah, I agree with you on the first two. I think the third one obviously would be much less granular and accurate than if you used options 1 and 2.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just currently working on a project where a lot of the employees are living in a country where collecting that kind of information is virtually impossible for legal reasons, not because it is extremely tedious to try to collect it and is a very dubious accuracy, but they're simply not allowed to collect that kind of information about individual performance. So that could be an issue in some places. Just a little feedback there.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Robert. There is a question from P. Ved. I hope I'm getting your name right. Let me go ahead and unmute you. You've got a longish question, so I don't want to misquote you. So you can speak on the call. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mahesh. I hope I'm audible,
Yes, you are.
though I can't hear you now, Mahesh.
We hear
Uh,
you loud and clear.
we hear you loud and clear now. Of course, she can't hear us, so he or she.
You have to type it in there.
Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm not sure if I'm audible or
Okay.
not. Okay.
Yes, you are. But it won't do us any good if she can't hear the response. Okay, so let's
Okay,
do.
I'll go ahead and ask. Thanks, Avinash, for this session. What I was really asking was the slide that you showed where from OKR to PPM to the projects mapping was happening. It's not a one-to-many mapping, it would be a many-to-many mapping. And let's assume there are certain projects which are taking up for execution, and certain outcomes are being met while the others are not. Would you continue to execute these projects or take a pause? How would you prioritize some of these projects and internal initiatives, both for budgeting and effort?
Sure. I think what most companies do is that they don't go to the drastic level of killing a particular initiative right after a quarter, but they do definitely reduce the funding for those in the following quarter. So what they then say is that we want you to focus on this initiative, certain key elements which will result in an improvement in the measurements that we are interested in. And if you can show no demonstrable improvement even at the end of the next quarter, then they should go ahead and significantly deprioritize or kill that particular initiative. What often happens is that a lot of the improvements in key results are actually driven by a smaller set of projects that, for whatever reason, not necessarily the merit of the project itself, catches fire. Because they're commissioned at the right time, they hit a market need, and drive a significant improvement in the key results that we are measuring. We want to back such projects with increased funding and with increased support, and that can happen in a constrained world only when we start to deprioritize other initiatives. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you will continue to support items which are not giving you that kind of value. And as a corollary, what that means is that you will not be able to give the projects that do catch fire the fuel that they need to burn brighter.
So unfortunately, Preeti wasn't able to hear you because of some technical glitch. I told her that we will send her the recording of the webinar, so she will be able to hear the answer. Maybe she might join back. So one of the things that commonly gets asked of me when we are implementing, especially our portfolio capabilities and our enterprise services planning module, and I think that's something that comes up regularly, is and that is indicated in the polls that we saw earlier, right? That the bigger challenge for lots of organizations is there is no formal process, and therefore not only implementing the formal process, but also then implementing a system that can reflect that formal process, including, like you said, the collaboration and the integrated, OKR to execution capability. That's a tall order. What's your advice for getting people to at least present the case for doing something like this to their leadership, whoever is the decision maker, or to make some incremental evolutionary approach to taking some baby steps to getting there?
Interestingly, especially for organizations that are adopting OKRs, the pressure is actually coming from the other side. Because it becomes painfully evident if you're doing OKRs at least reasonably well, that the initiatives that you've funded or the activities that you are doing are not moving the needle at all. There's just no ambiguity in terms of the movement or the progress on the OKRs itself, right? So the pressure tends to come from the OKR side into the execution side, rather than a need for the other way around. In the absence of an OKR driven structure, what often happens is that execution teams struggle to put that feedback back towards the strategic planning process, and they often feel unheard. But I think with OKRs, the pressures very much from the strategic planning side, because every month, every quarter, you do your monthly OKR review or your quarterly OKR review. You know how much progress you've made.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely get that picture. So I was hoping that there might be some more executive level participation in this webinar. So for those folks who are on the call, firstly, thank you for joining and staying back for the Q&A. But like Avinash said, if you are in a session where your OKR performance is being reviewed, then that would be the place to tell them about what systems exist out there, and maybe have some of them participate in the next time we have a session like this. So it looks like there aren't any other questions, Avinash. So
Okay.
I think
I would like to just say that we are, like I said, building out a system on Slack for PPM and OKRs. We would love to get feedback from you, to have people from this community really speak to us, utilize it, and then speak to us about what we have done well and what we have not done well. And in return, we will offer you the licenses for those products. We are still in the alpha stage, so please do reach out if you want to be part of that process, and we would love to have you.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to wind up. Thanks again to all of you who joined. There is a quick question coming up, or a poll question about how did you like the webinar. Please respond to that and let us know. And then we will be in touch with you. In the meantime, if you have any other questions for us, just do not hesitate to get in touch with us as well. Thank you, and thanks, Avinash. And we will see you all in a future webinar very soon.